All right, so now we're up to chapter 12, which is on what I always affectionately call the dreaded statement of cash flows. Students always love this chapter. But if you kind of follow my little way of doing the statement of cash flows, you should be able to do it fairly successfully and without too much pain and suffering. All right, so why? Why do we have another financial statement? We've got the balance sheet, we've got the income statement, we've got a statement of retained earnings, we've got various other statements. Why did FASB say we needed a statement of cash flows? I guess to answer that question, you could go back to the 80s, which is like ancient history at this point, but a lot of people owned stock in what they thought was a really safe company called W.T. Grant. I don't think anyone's heard of that anymore because they went bankrupt back then. But a lot of people owned stock. It was supposed to be very safe. And at that point, there was no statement of cash flows. And so W.T. Grant had a really good, what they called the current ratio, which is your, current assets divided by your current liabilities. And they had good working capital, which is your current assets minus your current liabilities. So this looked really good. I mean, they had 100 in current assets to cover, 20 in current liabilities. I mean, that's great. I mean, that looks really good. I'd buy stock in that, right? The only problem is, if you think about what's included in current assets, you've got cash, you've got accounts receivable, you've got inventory, that's probably enough right there. And so if you've got a total of current assets of 100, if you've got 80 in cash and maybe 10 in each of these, that's pretty good. I mean, that's okay. But that's not the story for W.T. Grant. Their situation was more like this. Maybe they had 80 in inventory. Then they had 10 in accounts receivable, or maybe 15 in accounts receivable, and then 5 in cash. So now you've got 5 of liquid assets to cover current liabilities of 20. That's not so good. So basically what happened is all the financials on the company looked good, and then all of a sudden they ran out of money and they went bankrupt and everybody lost everything. This was also the time of the savings and loan crisis, which you had a bunch of banks that they had a lot of mortgages out, mortgages that they'd issued to people. And so the thing about mortgages is that it looked like they had a lot of assets because they had all these mortgages receivable. So, it's like you have accounts receivable, they had mortgages receivable. And so that looks great on their balance sheet that, maybe they had 100 million in mortgages receivable. But they don't call it crisis for nothing. Nobody was able to pay back these mortgages. And so the banks, the savings and loans, were sitting there with all these things they were calling assets, but there was no future economic benefit because they were not going to be collecting most of them. And so as a result of all of this, FASB decided that it would be a good idea to have a statement of cash flows, because that would tell what's going on with the company's cash, because you don't necessarily get that from the balance sheet or the income statement. All right, so I guess the answer is yes, we do need, or why do we need a statement of cash flows? Is the answer to that yes? I don't know. Anyway, it's a good idea. All right, so as far as what the statement of cash flows is, it's going to break down into 4 sections: the operating section, investing, financing, and non-cash investing and financing. And it's going to say what cash comes in and out for each type of activity. So it's if you ever look at your bank statement, or maybe just your phone, just look at your phone and you can check your bank balance. You had cash at the beginning of the month, you had some cash come in, you had some cash come out. This is very similar to that, except that it breaks it down, it categorizes it by what types of cash came in and out. All right, so how are we going to do this? There are 2 methods to do the statement of cash flows. I am going to just go over the direct method, not the indirect method. I'm sorry. It's just the opposite. The direct method is not used by many companies at all. I will not cover the direct method. We will just be doing the indirect method. Okay, so it's the indirect method we need to know about. If you are interested in the direct method, you can find it in the appendix at the back of the chapter. Okay, so now there's kind of the easy way to do a statement of cash flows and the hard way. The hard way is to just kind of do the statement of cash flows. Not many students can actually do that and not miss something critical. I am going to show you how to use a worksheet. Your book calls it a spreadsheet for some reason. But we're going to use a worksheet, and we'll prepare the worksheet that will give us all the information so that we don't forget anything when we do the actual statement of cash flows. So we're going to use the indirect method only, but I'm going to show you how to do that with a worksheet or spreadsheet. And for this chapter, Excel is your friend. In the orientation section, at the bottom, there's sort of an Excel tutorial there that might be helpful. I'm not an expert on Excel, but I know enough to save you probably at least half your homework time. So if you watch those, they may be, they could help. Okay, so this is sort of the why, what, and how. And the next thing we'll get to is sort of the actual, how we're going to prepare the statement of cash flows.